After more than 6 years in development, Wuppo is finally upon us. Full disclosure here, this is a game that's definitely close and dear to my heart. I'm 19 years old, so remove 6 years, and that made me 13 at the time when this game was announced, and a contest was made to design a boss for the game. Suffice to say, I've been a fan of one of the two creators for this game for a while now, and I'll admit there's probably some nostalgia there too. But enough fanboying around, let's talk about how the final game is like, shall we? Wuppo is a side-scroller shooter with some tiny elements of Metroidvania and platforming thrown in there for some good measure. The art style isn't the most high fidelity, but I think it's really charming on its own right, sorta like a cartoon or one of those short animations from the 2000s. I'm not sure if everybody digs it, but I find it really nice and kinda cute personally, and the game has a really good soundtrack too that fits in very well with its aesthetic, and can also really surprise you at how flexible it can be in terms of mood or tone it can set for a given area or scene. But I don't want to get too deep into that because it's spoilers territory. The core gameplay consists of exploration, talking to all sorts of NPCs, and fighting things with your paint gun, or gum gun, as the game calls it. Try saying that 3 times fast. Although you also get extra weapons and can upgrade a few of them as the game progresses. The game's technically structured into levels, or I guess the more fitting description would be regions, as you keep unlocking the next one as you progress, but the world is still open and explorable if you want to backtrack, for instance. And you even unlock fast travel very late into the game. Each area will have a different objective to progress to the following one, which will usually be about solving a puzzle, obtaining a certain item, or fighting a boss, of which there are 17 of them. I think most of the bosses are generally well designed and fun to fight against, but they also get a little bit bad near the end of the game, where you fight what feels like just a bunch of regular enemies, but they're considered a boss for some reason, as if it was inflating the total boss count. And I don't want to spoil too much here, but I don't really like the final boss all that much either. Sure, it's hard, but I think that fight is more of a clusterfuck of projectiles than anything else. Also, your weapons really aren't all that great at shooting upwards, but that guy tends to float around anyways, oftentimes just barely out of range for your weapons. But then there's the giant dust monster or the rock statue, which are some of my favorites, which were challenging but also really enjoyable to fight. They all have their own unique patterns, which you have to learn to tackle them efficiently. Sure, you may die a few times finding out those patterns, but that's part of the fun of fighting these bosses to me. Difficulty varies between normal, hard, and insane, which changes how much damage enemies do to you. I personally went with hard for a decent challenge, but nothing too far out there. The puzzles, on the other hand, even if there are a few of them, they are all well put together in my opinion. They're not overly complex or anything, but they play on the game's lore quite nicely. There's a big temple near the end, and I think that's the best example of it in the game. It really is quite something, and there are definitely some crazy surprises there, part of which is some of what I mentioned about the soundtrack too, but I really don't want to ruin it for you. Also, about the objectives I mentioned earlier, they're usually good too, but there is one big exception around the mid-game, where you go to this big city and it has this credit system, where you can contribute to increase an overall score of sorts of the town, and you can do it through a couple different minigames, which are fun, don't get me wrong here, but the overall score that you need seems to be way more than it should have, because you have to repeat these minigames a lot to get there, to the point where it really gets repetitive and almost feels like it was done to pad out the game a little bit. I'm not a fan of waiting mechanics in general, but I do think they have their time and place, like in the Splankacker Park for instance, where you have to wait around for all the rides and stuff. I mean, it's just a fun optional thing, and I think it adds some charm to the region overall. And that's one thing that this game's honestly full of, charm. I mean, Splankacker Park? The names of these races are kinda wacky. I don't know if it means anything. I mean, the developers are from the Netherlands, so there is a language barrier there, I suppose. But there's also the humor in the dialogue, and it's so upbeat and lighthearted. It's definitely a really nice experience when you meet a new character and get to talk to them, which will usually make you smile just reading what they have to say. The story is rather simple at the end of the day, but it's things like these that carry the game and elevate it to something really unique and quite special. And that ties into the collectibles that this game has, which are film strips, which show you a little bit more about this game's world and lore, or just some funny situations. And then there's happiness, which you can get by doing all sorts of stuff around the levels or on conversations with NPCs, where you choose a specific dialogue option or you do something for them. Not your typical quests or anything, by the way. The game's more clever than that. There are also a few fun secrets and Easter eggs out there, so I definitely would recommend you to keep your eyes peeled while exploring, and also return to some older areas once you're late into the game. So overall, this game's gonna take you around 12 to 15 hours to beat, depending on how much you want to explore and all that. But I personally think this game's worth it. It's really a nice and fun experience that doesn't really take itself all that seriously, and I think we need more side-scrollers like this. It kinda reminds me of Hell Yeah, Wrath of the Dead Rabbit, which is a similar game in spirit in my eyes, like the way I felt playing it. It's hard to explain, and I'm probably sounding kinda pretentious here, so I'll just say this. I would definitely recommend Wuppo for pretty much almost anybody, and it's gonna make you really happy while playing it. And just for $15 or the original equivalent, I think it's a nice purchase.